I knew something was off the moment I stepped into Harland's office and he didn't look up. Not a nod, not a flicker of acknowledgement. Just him, hunched over his tablet like he was ordering a damn burrito instead of gutting a human being. The blinds were half closed, casting this ugly diagonal light across the room that made it feel like I'd wandered into a cheap interrogation set. And there it was, one manila envelope, perfectly aligned on the corner of his desk like it had been waiting all night to ambush me. "You're being eliminated," he said, monotone. "Your role is no longer aligned with our strategic direction. Security will escort you out." That was it. 7 years of building this company's operational spine from a duct-taped prototype to a global licensing machine. And I didn't even get eye contact. No thank you. No transition plan. Not even the courtesy of pretending it was about performance. Just erasure. The man slid me out of existence like closing a pop-up window. And the kicker? It happened exactly 5 minutes after I'd submitted our finalized multi-market strategy, something I'd worked on for 14 straight weekends while Harland was out Instagramming cocktails on vision retreats. I opened the envelope slowly, scanning the familiar template of termination clauses like I was reading an old obituary. I looked up and finally met his eyes, cold, flat, already halfway checked out. I could have snapped, should have screamed. But instead, I said it calmly, almost sweetly. "Let's make sure we do this properly. By the way, if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. You wouldn't believe how much it helps the team keep these stories coming. 97% of our listeners never subscribe, but you can change that. All right, back to it. I signed the papers right there. No trembling hand, no hesitation. Just ink to paper like I was approving an invoice. When I handed them back, Harland gave a tight little nod and mumbled, "You'll be escorted down shortly." I stood up, tucked the envelope under my arm, and walked out without another word, not even a glance back. Security met me at the elevator like it was choreographed. One guy, mid-30s, trying to look tough in an ill-fitting blazer. He asked if I had any personal items to collect. I said no. Everything I actually valued was either in my head or already buried in legal structures Harland didn't even know existed. As we rode down in silence, I could feel it starting. The pressure behind my eyes, that slow burn of humiliation. But right underneath it was something stronger, something sharper. Not grief, not fear, calculation. Because Harland didn't know who he just fired. He thought I was just another VP, operations, licensing, whatever the flavor of the month had been. He didn't know I was the one who'd written the original operating agreement when this place was nothing but rented desks and debt. Didn't know I'd been the first outside investor when the founders were still shopping for health insurance. He never once asked who Caro Holdings was on the cap table. Never even glanced at the layered trust agreements tucked in the back of the shareholder packet. Harland didn't know I owned 85% of the company, and now he'd just terminated his majority shareholder without due process. I stepped out into the lobby, nodded at the receptionist like it was any other Tuesday, and walked straight into the November air. It was cold, brittle. My breath fogged as I crossed the street and slid into the back of a waiting lift. I didn't even tell the driver where to go at first. I just sat there, processing, sifting. Then I pulled out my phone and I started the sequence. 8 years ago, we were a joke in a strip mall. 4 people, a borrowed printer, and a coffee machine that made everything taste like burnt popcorn. The original founders were brilliant, no doubt, but none of them had a clue how to structure a business. They were coders, dreamers, product visionaries. But spreadsheets, vendor contracts, capitalization tables, that was all me. I wasn't interested in a flashy title back then. I didn't want co-founder stamped on my email signature or to sit in the spotlight when we demoed at tech expos. Titles fade. Leverage doesn't. So while they scrambled for seed money, I made them a different offer. I wrote the founding documents myself, an operating agreement buried in 50 pages of plain language, dry as toast but sharp as a scalpel. I offered a 6-figure investment through a holding company no one questioned. No one ever questioned me, period. I was just logistics, operations, the legal savvy one. They were happy to let me handle the boring stuff. But every clause I drafted had a purpose. Every percentage point tucked behind a trust, every silent share structured through Caro Holdings was a safeguard. a trapdoor, a firewall against idiots like Harland. Over the course of 4 early rounds, 2 equity, 1 convertible note, and 1 bridge, I funneled more money into this company than all 3 founders combined. The shares were technically anonymous. Caro Holdings signed every agreement. My name never appeared on the major stakeholder registry, not directly, but I controlled the board voting rights. The founders' agreement granted me material decision notification power in case of major operational shifts. The third appendix tied board votes to majority approval, not of the executive team, but of the actual equity holders. It was all there, in the paperwork, in black and white, just buried deep enough that no one would ever bother reading it, especially not a marketing CEO who thought due diligence meant asking ChatGPT for a summary. I remember the day Harland was announced. The press release called him a visionary and a disruptor, said he was brought in to lead the next era of growth. He wore these smug, over-tailored suits and started referring to the strategy team as his think tank. Everyone started walking a little faster, smiling a little wider. No one noticed that the man didn't understand half of the platforms we operated on. But I did. I sat quietly, watching him give his little town hall speeches about reimagining scalability and breaking silos. I watched him reorganize leadership into colorful slides and jargon. I watched him toss out 3 vendors I'd vetted over a year of negotiations because their names didn't fit the new brand aesthetic. And I said nothing, because I knew. I knew the moment he crossed the line, and he would, I had everything I needed already printed, signed, and notarized. Every legal weapon already sharpened, every trigger already built into the floorboards. He just didn't know where to step. Harland had no idea what Caro Holdings was. He had no idea what I'd built while everyone else was pitching decks and pulling all-nighters on beta launches. I wasn't the founder people followed on Twitter. I was the name no one remembered, on purpose. I didn't want their applause. I wanted their silence when it all shifted. And I was about to get exactly that. The termination documents were just boilerplate. Generic legalese they probably pulled from a template HR downloaded in 2017. Harland didn't even bother customizing the language. It still said, termination without cause, like it was some kind of mercy. He didn't realize what that phrase actually triggered. I signed without flinching. No sarcasm, no speech, just a signature that looked ordinary, but marked the beginning of a procedural storm he was completely unprepared for. I handed him my badge. He didn't say anything. Maybe he thought I was in shock. Maybe he thought I'd go home and cry into a pillow and send a bitter email at midnight. The kind he could ignore, forward to HR, then delete. Instead, I walked out the front doors, took a lift 3 blocks, and checked into a hotel suite I'd kept reserved on a rolling basis for exactly this scenario. The keycard had dust on it. I hadn't used it in years, but the place was exactly how I left it. Neutral, sterile, ready. I plugged in my laptop, connected to the private drive, and opened the digital vault containing the full founder's agreement, complete with every clause, amendment, and timeline tracker. And right there, buried under Appendix C, was my moment. The material decision notification clause was the first thread I pulled. It stated that any major operational shift, including termination of an executive-level employee holding more than 5% vested interest, required notification and review by all primary stakeholders, which of course hadn't happened, because no one knew I held 85%. Second came the board majority pre-approval requirement. That one was my favorite. An obscure clause I'd snuck in during the 3rd round of equity structuring. It required that any executive termination involving a founder or early investor with controlling interest had to be pre-approved by a supermajority of the board, or the action would be considered procedurally invalid and subject to immediate reversal or vote. And Harland? He'd bypassed the board entirely. No vote, no notification, just hubris in a tailored suit. I drafted the notification letters personally. No assistance, no formatting, just clean language, legally bulletproof and time-stamped. Each was sent directly to the board members' private inboxes per the contact protocol outlined in the 2015 Agreement Addendum. No middlemen, no warning. The subject line read, Activation of Clauses 12A and 19C, Notification of Material Termination Event. The message was short, clinical. As the primary controlling stakeholder operating under Caro Holdings, I am hereby notifying the board of a material decision made on November 14th at 8:05 a.m. regarding the termination of an executive role with controlling interest. This action was taken without proper board notification or approval, and as such, both Clause 12A and Clause 19C are now active pending review. Attached was a PDF of the original operating agreement, annotated and time-stamped, alongside a copy of my termination papers, signed, scanned, and legally admissible. Then I hit send. No calls, no threats, no social media drama, just the beginning of a procedural correction that would feel, to Harland, like a trapdoor opening beneath him while he smiled for a photo op. I closed the laptop and poured a drink, not to celebrate, not yet, but because I knew I'd spent years building a system that would never need a raised voice, just a signature. By noon the second day, legal had gone dead silent. Not a peep from the usually hyperactive in-house counsel, no new contracts circulating, not even a memo about next week's hiring fair Harland had been so excited about. The silence spread like a virus, fast, invisible, impossible to trace back to its source if you didn't know what to look for. But I did. I knew exactly what I'd triggered, and it was working. At 10:17 a.m., the company's general counsel, Derek Nichols, a man who once referred to legal audits as a distraction from velocity, received a formal stop order. The language was clear, cold, beautiful. Effective immediately, all material actions including executive hiring, termination, corporate restructuring, and international strategy adjustments are frozen pending formal review by the majority ownership stakeholder in compliance with operating clauses 12A and 19C. Violations will be considered breaches of fiduciary duty under Delaware corporate law. Harland didn't even know what hit him. He was in the middle of prepping a splashy keynote for some faux strategic partner summit when the notice reached his desk. I wasn't there, obviously, but I have reliable sources. Word is, he didn't believe it at first, thought it was a prank, said something like, "Who the hell is the majority stakeholder? This has to be a mistake." It wasn't. While he was busy yelling into his phone, board members were opening encrypted files sent directly to their personal addresses, files they weren't supposed to receive unless two conditions were met: material operational deviation and confirmed violation of clause protocol. Each one opened the same file. Subject: Beneficial Ownership and Control Review. Inside, a full forensic breakdown of the company's equity structure going back to founding, Caro Holdings, voting proxy pathways, layered trusts, tax filings, compliance history, and my name quietly attached in a notarized declaration as sole controlling agent of Caro. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. One board member, I'm told, read the entire file twice before speaking. Another sent it straight to his private counsel, not because they wanted to fight me, but because they realized in that moment how much they'd missed while Harland played king. The mood shifted. The energy in the boardroom that afternoon wasn't panic, it was restraint. They didn't know yet what I planned to do, but they knew it was now out of Harland's hands. And maybe, just maybe, it had never really been in his hands at all. Harland burst into the room like a man ready to start a war. "I want names," he barked. "I want to know who thinks they can override the CEO's authority without so much as a phone call." No one answered. He paced, demanded to see the legal team, called the chair complicit. He shouted something about rogue investors manipulating policy, which only made him sound more paranoid. The room didn't fight back. They didn't reassure him. They didn't nod. They just watched. Because every single person in that room had the file, and every single one now knew what he didn't. He didn't run this company. He never had. They saw the clauses, the ownership trail, the embedded vote structures that now made every decision he made, every hire, every initiative, every budget shift, not only voidable, but potentially grounds for legal action. They knew the brakes had been pulled, quietly, surgically, and Harland, the man who thought he could erase me with one bland sentence, now found himself frozen in place, arms flailing, the engine he thought he controlled now seized in mid-motion. All that remained was the board meeting, the one I had just scheduled. The call came just after midnight. Private number. No voicemail preview, just the persistent buzz on my nightstand like a polite knock on a locked door. I already knew who it was before I answered. "Hello, Alan," I said, my voice steady. A pause. "I wasn't aware," the chairman finally said. There was tension behind the words, but not confrontation. Just confusion, maybe even a little awe, like someone realizing they've been sitting on a landmine for years, and only now heard it click. "You weren't supposed to be," I replied. Silence again. Then, with the same weight he used when announcing quarterly guidance on investor calls, he said, "Let's schedule a meeting. Properly." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I've already prepared the voting packet. You'll have it within the hour." Click. No drawn-out negotiation, no probing questions, just a seasoned executive who understood what it meant when someone speaks softly while holding a loaded ledger. I didn't delay. The proxy packet had been assembled long before Harland even arrived. It wasn't reaction. It was insurance. Documents signed and notarized by an independent compliance firm, listing the full ownership structure under Caro Holdings, my binding vote authority, and the dormant clauses now active due to Harland's unauthorized action. The whole thing was legal Kevlar. I attached it to the secure board distribution thread with a timestamp and audit log. The subject line was deliberately boring. Shareholder voting proxy, special session materials. But the message below was not. Just one line. Let's ensure compliance before further disruption. No threats, no legalese, no fire. Just a reminder. This wasn't a negotiation. This was the course correction. Every board member received the same packet. They didn't need to respond. They knew it was real. They'd seen the ownership trail. They'd seen the freeze, and now they saw the next step. A vote. One Harland wouldn't be allowed to control. I booked the boardroom myself. I even requested the old conference space on the 6th floor, the same room where we used to huddle in mismatched chairs, scribbling go-to-market plans on whiteboards we couldn't afford to clean properly. Back then, no one wore suits. We wore stress and ambition. The room still smelled like old carpet and bad coffee. I liked that. Felt honest. Harland, of course, tried to move the meeting, claimed it sent the wrong message to stakeholders, said the space was beneath the dignity of the current executive team. The request was denied. Alan, the chairman, replied simply, "We'll follow protocol." And that was the final crack in the illusion. The board had chosen a side, quietly, without declarations, without drama. Because when the documents are sound, the chain of authority speaks louder than any tantrum. Harland didn't know it yet, but the next time he walked into that room, he wouldn't be sitting at the head of the table. He'd be the subject of the agenda. The air in the conference room felt heavier than usual that morning, thick with pretense and tension. They'd dressed it up, of course. Harland made sure of that. Fresh flower arrangements on the credenza, bottled spring water at every seat, a catered breakfast no one touched. He sat tall at the head of the table like he owned it, hands folded, chin up, his favorite navy blazer buttoned tight like a suit of armor. I almost admired the commitment to the illusion. The board members filed in slowly, some avoiding eye contact, others offering neutral nods that said nothing and meant less. The chair, Alan, was the last to enter. He didn't sit right away. He didn't smile. He simply placed a thick folder onto the table and began reading. This meeting was convened to address procedural irregularities regarding the termination of an executive stakeholder, he began, voice measured, calm as a closing bell. Before we proceed, I'd like to formally enter the revised share register into record. He paused, then opened the folder and read my name. Caro Holdings, managed by Ms. Jordan Denner, currently holds 85% controlling interest in Newgate Systems, as verified by counsel and contract documentation dating back to 2015. The silence that followed was a full-body kind. No throat clears, no chair shifting, not even the hum of HVAC. Harland's expression barely moved at first, like his brain needed an extra 10 seconds to translate what had just happened. But then it hit. The color drained from his face so fast I could see the moment he registered what the chair had just said, 85%. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. There must be a misunderstanding. That can't be accurate. Alan didn't respond. He simply turned to page 2. The operating agreement, as amended in 2016 and ratified by legal in 2018, grants majority control rights to the beneficial owner of Caro Holdings, which includes the authority to trigger clauses 12A and 19C and to request a board vote of confidence on executive leadership. At that, Harland pushed back from the table an inch, like the chair was suddenly too hot to sit in. "This is absurd. We need to adjourn. I want legal counsel present." "You're welcome to bring legal representation to the next meeting," Alan said, still not raising his voice. "But this one will proceed as scheduled." The vote wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was just clean. One by one, the board members raised their hands. Yes, yes, yes. A few looked down when they said it. Some didn't. One woman stared directly at Harland the entire time, her face unreadable. 9 votes, 1 abstention. No one voted to keep him. Alan gave him the dignity of a pause before closing his folder. In light of the board's vote and Ms. Denner's controlling interest, effective immediately, Harland Case is removed as Chief Executive Officer of Newgate Systems. No applause, no exit music, just the dull scrape of Harland's chair as he stood, slowly, as if his legs didn't quite believe it either. He didn't look at me. Not once. Maybe because deep down, he knew if he did, he'd see it. The trap he walked into, the documents he never read, the ego that blinded him. Maybe he thought he could still spin this, reframe it as an unfair ousting or a technicality. But it wasn't. It was the rules, the ones I wrote. He walked out on his own without saying a word. The sound of the door clicking shut behind him felt louder than anything else that day. No one moved for a full minute. Then Alan cleared his throat. "Let's move to Agenda Item 2, Interim Leadership Transition." And just like that, the page turned. I didn't sit in Harland's chair, didn't even touch it. The room still carried the scent of his cologne, expensive, performative, slightly desperate. That chair had become a symbol of everything bloated and brittle about his style of leadership, and I had no interest in inheriting that kind of weight. Titles had never been my currency anyway. Influence was. And I already had that. Signed and sealed, so I made a different call. I appointed Mia Teller as interim CEO. Mia had been in the wings for years, quiet, sharp, allergic to theatrics. She understood infrastructure and diplomacy in equal measure. More importantly, she understood what kind of silence meant stability and what kind meant warning. That nuance had been missing under Harland's reign, replaced by a kind of manic volume, rebrands, summits, and pep talks that said a lot and meant nothing. She didn't send out a dramatic announcement or post an inspirational quote on LinkedIn. She walked into her first exec meeting with a 3-page plan and a simple request. We listen before we change. And the company exhaled. The reorg wasn't flashy. There were no org charts with gradient colors or synergy pods, just precise adjustments. The vendor relations team, decimated by Harland's ego, was rebuilt with old contacts and long-standing trust. Procurement stabilized. Engineering got their timelines back. Marketing stopped chasing buzzwords and started responding to actual performance metrics again. I watched it all unfold from the side, not as a ghost, not as a monarch, but as something closer to a compass. Deals that had stalled under Harland's visionary urgency began moving again. One of our international licensing partners, who had ghosted us after a disastrous leadership summit, scheduled a call within 2 weeks of the transition. When asked why, they simply said, "We heard there's someone rational steering now." Internally, something shifted in the halls. You could feel it. The energy changed. It wasn't fear-based anymore. It was alert. Employees who had checked out started asking questions again. Teams that had gone radio silent began submitting suggestions, not just deliverables. The Friday Slack chatter returned, not memes and sarcasm, but small things. Gratitude, curiosity, people reaching out not because they were told to, but because something felt worth being part of again. I didn't need credit. The people who needed to know already did. And those who didn't? They just saw the company steadying itself like a ship that had been pitched too far to one side, finally easing back into balance. Harland's name stopped coming up after a while. No one eulogized him. No one mocked him either. It was like watching a bad storm pass and deciding not to talk about the furniture it broke. One afternoon, I walked past the open atrium near engineering. A junior developer I'd never met was showing a new hire around. She pointed up toward the executive suite and said, "That's where the new CEO works, the one who actually listens." She didn't know I was standing 10 feet away, and that's exactly how I liked it. It was a Tuesday. Cold morning, sky the color of old concrete, the kind of weather that made everyone walk a little faster, heads tucked, phones out. I parked in the same spot I used to, B4, corner space, a little too tight but close to the elevator. No fanfare, no reserved sign. Just the rhythm of returning to something I never truly left. I stepped through the front doors without hesitation, swiped my new badge, different credentials, same authority, and watched the green light blink. The security guard barely looked up, too busy scrolling his phone. Reception, though, did a double take. Not in fear, not in awe, just recognition. She opened her mouth like she might say something. I nodded once, gently, and kept walking. She didn't stop me. No one did. The click of my heels down the hallway echoed louder than I remembered. Maybe it was always that quiet. Or maybe I'd just forgotten how much silence follows power when it doesn't need to scream. The elevator doors opened onto the conference floor. That room, Conference A2 with the long walnut table and the terrible overhead lights, had once been where Harland stood, flanked by his yes men, grinning like a politician on game show night. The energy had been synthetic, overly rehearsed, and oddly aggressive, like every pitch was a performance and every question an insult. Now, the room was still, organized, intentional, and there he was, Mark Greaves, Senior VP of Corporate Strategy, the same man who had walked me out that day, holding a branded envelope like it was a holy relic, avoiding eye contact while saying, "I'm really sorry, it's just protocol." He had looked almost relieved when the elevator doors shut behind me. He was already seated at the table when I walked in, mid-discussion with Mia and a few directors. When he looked up and saw me, something flickered across his face. Panic, guilt, maybe both. He half stood, his mouth already moving to form what I'm sure would have been some mix of apology and damage control. I raised a hand slightly. "Let's move forward," I said. That was it. No tension, no slow clap, just a redirection. He sat back down. Mia gave me a nod, brief, aligned, and resumed the conversation without missing a beat. That, too, was intentional. No formal reintroduction, no announcement that I was back because I'd never been gone in the way people thought. Titles had changed, circumstances had shifted, but I was still the architect of the floor beneath their feet. The meeting began. It was about our Asia-Pacific rollout, logistics, vendor compliance, multi-region partner onboarding, the kind of work I thrived in, detailed, strategic, essential. I listened more than I spoke. Asked 2 questions, got 3 answers. Mia took the lead and I let her. That was the plan. Always had been. The room carried a different tone now. Tighter, but not tense, more focused. The performative edge was gone. These people weren't jockeying for proximity to the throne. They were trying to build something again. And that was all I ever wanted. After the meeting, as people stood to leave, a few lingered behind. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. Quiet gratitude. They shook my hand. Said, "Good to see you again." No long speeches, just the kind of presence that had weight now, the kind that couldn't be shaken by a manila envelope or erased by a nameplate change. As I walked back out through the lobby, the receptionist smiled softly. She didn't ask if I needed anything. She already knew I had everything I needed. I stepped out into the cold again, pulled my coat tighter, and smiled to myself. Not because I had returned, but because I hadn't needed to announce it. 3 months passed, not in silence, but in rhythm. The kind of rhythm that tells you an organization is healing, not fast, not loudly, but with direction. I still didn't take a formal office, didn't need to. Mia ran the day-to-day with clarity and calm, and I kept my seat on the board, where my presence mattered most. Strategic oversight, capital decisions, long-term protection. The building didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a company again. Then, one afternoon, as I was reviewing our revised EU licensing agreement, my phone buzzed with a message from Alan, the chairman. No text, just a link. Harland's LinkedIn. I shouldn't have clicked, But of course I did. His profile picture had changed, still professionally lit, still wearing the same navy suit, though now it looked more like a costume than a uniform. The post read, "After a period of deep professional reflection, I'm thrilled to begin advising early-stage founders on strategic exits, brand elevation, and transformational leadership. Every ending is a beginning." I read it twice, then laughed once. Not cruelly, not bitterly, just like someone reading a book they used to think was profound before realizing it had no ending. The likes were sparse. A few generic comments, one from some mutual connection I hadn't heard of in years. But then, buried under it all, there was one comment that made me pause. It was from a board member, one who had voted yes in that room on that cold November morning. It simply said, "Start by reading your own bylaws next time." No emoji, no follow-up, just that. A precise incision through the puffed-up narrative Harland had tried to wrap himself in. That comment was liked 47 times. I saw 2 familiar names among them. It stayed there, untouched, as if everyone collectively decided that no more needed to be said. That was the final chapter. Not the post, not Harland's little rebrand. That one comment. Because ownership isn't about optics. It's not about a LinkedIn headline or how confidently you sit at the head of a table. It's about what you build when no one's watching. The foundations buried beneath ego. The clauses no one reads. The leverage no one respects until it's too late. Harland fired me thinking I was dead weight, an outdated operational cog, a footnote in his story. But that morning, when he slid that envelope across the desk without even looking up, he wasn't eliminating a middle manager, he was eliminating his boss.